Learning to play jazz, we practice a lot of scales and arpeggios, and we of course need them when we're soloing. But I think it's actually better to work a lot more on actually making music, coming up with new things and using the things that we're practicing when we're working with all these dry things like scales and arpeggios. So in this video, I'm going to go over that process and show you how you can take one arpeggio and use it in a lot of different places associated with different chords, and also make some great lines with it. My name is Larsen, learn jazz, make music. To keep this simple, I'm going to take a C major 7 arpeggio, and then I'm going to use that and associate that with a few different chords and give you an insight into that process. So you probably already know a C major 7 arpeggio like this, or maybe you're playing it in a complete position like this one. In general, I think you should practice your arpeggios as diatonic arpeggios within a scale, and if you want to check out a video where I'm talking about this, then check out the video that I'm linking to in the description called The Most Important Scale Exercise in Jazz. The obvious place to start is of course to use a C major 7 arpeggio on a C major 7 chord. And then we can also talk a little bit about how I'm actually finding places where I can use this arpeggio. Because what I'm using here is my knowledge of scales, and especially my knowledge of the scales in terms of the diatonic chords within the scales. I don't know that many different types of scales really, but I do know them really well, and I know all the diatonic chords in there. And I would also suggest that you always make sure to, whatever scale you know the diatonic chords that are found in it. So of course the most important thing that I'm using here is that in a major scale we have a major 7 chord on the 1st and the 4th note. And those are sort of the two places that I start with, and then I associate that with some chords. The first example here is using two C major 7 arpeggios in inversion. So I start with a first inversion C major 7, and I'm playing that as a sweep arpeggio, and then I'm adding 2 8th notes and then playing another inversion, and then after that I go into some chromaticism. The idea with the 2 notes is actually just taking this idea, this melody, and then moving that in the bar so that it's not starting on a heavy beat but starting on the 4 now, and then using the thirds as a motif that I can move around with some chromaticism. In the first example, the C major 7 was sort of the root of the key, but of course it can also be the 4th note in the key. So in this case, I'm using it in a G major situation, and I'm using it on the A minor chord. So I'm using it as the arpeggio from the 3rd of the A minor chord. Here I'm playing it as a triplet where I'm really targeting the high B. So I'm just adding a B under it as a leading note and then a triplet. Then from this I'm adding a chromatic enclosure to take me to the A, and that's on the D7, and then from here I go into this D7 flat 9 line, kind of coming out of an F sharp diminished arpeggio, resolving to G major 7. And since we are already busy with using a C major 7 arpeggio in a G major context, we can of course also use it on a D7, sort of a static D7 chord. And that's what I'm doing here. So the first part of it is really just stating sort of the D major. So that's just a D major triad. Then we have the C major 7 arpeggio. I'm again using the 8th note triplet idea, going up to a high D. And then this is sort of D7 arpeggio-ish thing. And then just ending on the 3rd of the D7. Major 7 arpeggios are also really great material if you're improvising over half diminished chords, and that's how I'm using it here. So here I'm using a C major 7 arpeggio over an F sharp half diminished. So I'm using it from the flat 5 of the half diminished chord. And this is sort of coming out of a harmonic minor context. So we have the C major 7 as the flat 6 in E minor, E harmonic minor. The first part of it is really just the arpeggio, then a chromatic run down to G. That keeps on going down to F sharp, so now we're on B7 flat 9, and then it's again just a diminished arpeggio, then a leading note, then some more diminished triad, and then resolving to the E minor. And of course, we can also use the C major 7 arpeggio in more of a modal situation if you have a Lydian sound going on for some time. So for instance, if you're playing the second 4 bars of Inner Urge, and that's exactly what I'm working with here. So I'm using the C major 7 arpeggio on an F major 7 sharp 11 chord. And the first part of this line is just really just F major 7 arpeggio, scale run, and then we get the C major 7 arpeggio. And then here I'm adding a small chromatic run that's just targeting the 9th of the F major 7. Most of the time when we're thinking about major 7 arpeggios, then we're thinking about them being sort of consonant and being the resolution that we go to. But you can actually also use them as being something that's quite exotic or dissonant sounding. And here I'm using a C major 7 arpeggio as a part of a sound on top of another major 7 chord. I'm using it on top of an A flat major 7 sharp 5. And this is coming out of also a not very common scale. It's coming out of the Augmented Scale, which is a 6-note scale. And actually that 6-note scale you can look at as being the sum of 3 major 7 chords. So that would be the C major 7, the A flat major 7, and the E major 7 chord. And that means that we have this scale. And what I'm using here is first just the A flat major 7, then I'm going to C major 7, then going down to an A flat again, and then up to the E, so up to the 3rd here, really getting that major 7 sharp 5 sound. I think it's very important that you spend time really being creative and trying to come up with new things and improvising rather than just running up and down scales and arpeggios. You need to do it a bit, of course, but it is really much more important that you focus your practice on actually making music and becoming better at playing music. And therefore, I think stuff like this is really important to check out. If you want to check out a video where I'm going over the way that I think you should focus your arpeggio practice and how you should really connect it with the scales that you already know and also make lines with it, then check out this video called The Most Important Scale Exercise in Jazz.